Hi, everyone. It is so good to be together again today. I'm really excited and honored that I get to have this conversation with you. And so I wanted to introduce our panelists for How to Be an Anti-Racist by Dr. Ibram X. Kendi. And so we have with us today Mrs. Catherine Chris Martin. She is originally from Southern California. She worked in benefits and has been in Texas for almost 30 years, spending just over 2 years in the city of Georgetown. She likes that people are friendly in Georgetown, and there's so much to do in Sun City, Georgetown, and the surrounding communities. She does hope that there will be improvements in U.S. race relations for her children and her grandchildren. So welcome, Catherine. We have Dr. Melissa Johnson. She is a professor of anthropology and chair of both the sociology and anthropology and race and ethnicity studies programs at Southwestern University. As a critical race scholar, she has published the book Becoming Creole, Nature and Race in Belize, as well as articles on race and inequality. She teaches courses on race and racism. She includes sections on race and racism in every single one of her courses and has been involved with anti-racist work at Southwestern University since she started teaching there in 1998. Thank you, Dr. Johnson. And then we have Jaquita Wilson. Jaquita Wilson has lived in Georgetown for 7 years and is an active member of the community, a military wife, a mother of 5. She has a bachelor's degree in English from Montclair State University and experience as an equity facilitator and teacher, and as a dear and close personal friend as well. So Jaquita, we're so blessed to have you share your wisdom and your knowledge here today. So I'm really excited. I love being able to have these conversations. I do want to just take a quick moment and give a little bit of acknowledgement to Richard. So Richard is Catherine Chris Martin's husband, and he was going to be with us and was unable to be with us for this, but you all, he is a published author of 6 novels of different genres, and I hope that we will be able to include him in something and you all will be able to hear from him. He has a wonderful story about the arc of racism throughout his life and how he's become and is working to become an anti-racist. And so I hope there's another opportunity to include him and to hear his voice soon, because he's important. So please tell him we said hello. Wonderful. I just wanted to take a moment and allow each of you, so we will start with you, Catherine, but I want to allow each of you to tell us why you're here today and why you agreed to this conversation about race. So what is so critically important about learning how to be an anti-racist?
Well, thank you for inviting me, first of all, and also for the kind comments about my husband, Richard. This is really important to me because I have, as you said in my bio, my children, my grandchildren. I have a couple of grandchildren and they're 2 years old. And we continue to have issues with people of color being treated inappropriately and hurt and murdered. And I want things to improve. I want them to improve for their generation and for the next generation. And I think it's very important that we not only speak out against all these things, but be willing to confront people when we see things happening. So that's why I'm here.
Beautiful. Thank you. Jaquita, why are you here participating in this conversation, and why is it important that we become anti-racist?
Well, I'm here because you asked me, and I can't say no to you. So that's one. But really, again, I also have 5 children, but previous to that, I grew up in a big city and was surrounded by people of color. And when I moved to the suburbs, it was a really big culture shock how far we are. And to watch my children struggle in a way that I didn't have to struggle because I was surrounded by people that looked like me. We struggled financially. We struggled with the system in the way that the system does cities and, large swaths of people of color. But the hate that you get in the suburbs as a Black or brown child is some different hate. It's a different type of bullying. And I just felt like I couldn't sit back and be quiet and watch that continue to happen. and just hope that they make it out of it, you know, mentally stable. So that's why I'm doing this work.
Thank you for that vulnerability. As y'all know, I'm a teacher, so I teach high school and have for the past, this is my 9th year. And so much of this work starts in schools. And so I'm excited that you're going to bring that lens as both a mother and an educator to this conversation, Jaquita. Thank you. Dr. Melissa Johnson, affectionately referred to as Mel John. Why are you here? And
well, yeah, so I mean, I'm married to a Black man. My children are both identify as Black, although one is very light skinned. So there's a little bit of personal skin in the game. And that's also how I learned to understand race. I actually didn't get race and racism before I spent time in Belize, spent time with Black people, and was married to a Black person. And that then led me down the pathway to try to understand it from a sort of academic perspective. And I am fully convinced that racism and colorism, that the colorism is part of racism, is the biggest social problem that our world faces, and that everything else that we're facing at this moment in time is completely intertwined with it. And if we can't fix that, we're doomed as a species. And a lot of the life on this planet is doomed. I'm sure bacteria and cockroaches will be fine, but so to me, it's the most critical thing that we can address. And so many people want to skate by and not see how deep it is, or want to pretend that we're past it. You know, there's no race anymore. And I love that Jaquita made that point of the suburbs. Like, white people are really, they just are terrible in many, many ways. We're recording this, oh well. But there's a terribleness that they can move past, but a lot of people really hold on to that. And that there are spaces where people who are not white, so Black people, Indigenous people, there's spaces where these people thrive and their societies thrive, and that needs to be upheld and built up as much as racism is torn down. So I don't know if that was really, but anyway, that's my thoughts. What are yours? I hope you're going to add to it.
Yeah, so it's interesting because Jaquita and I often have this conversation and we kind of go back and forth, like what needs to fall first, racism or patriarchy? And I'll let her kind of tell you where she falls on that. But I think you're right. I think this is one of the most deeply rooted problems in our world. And obviously it impacts every single thing. We're looking at climate change, and racism has impacted climate change and our care and concern for our land, right? So racism impacts every single thing, impacts every single system. And I think that we are going to have to reckon with that. And I really thought that COVID-19 might be the reckoning or a reckoning. And so far, not so much. You know, I think that once people started seeing that it was Black and brown folks that have been deeply impacted by COVID, we started to see restrictions be lifted. And so we've got to do it, or else we won't have anything, right? I'm already concerned about what we're seeing in climate. And I want to be clear, like that is a conversation about humanity. A lot of times people say, well, I don't want to get political. Humanity first. We're talking about the sacredness of people and humans, and that's all people. And until we take care of each other, and until we address racism, specifically anti-Black and anti-Indigenous racism, none of us can have our humanity. Our humanity is tied. And so we really need to work it out. Conversations like this are a start, and it's like, we're going to talk about it today, but where are we going to go from here? And what is our personal responsibility? And so as we journey through this conversation together, which I know we could talk for hours because it's just so deep, what I want people that are watching to hear is that we didn't create racism, right? We didn't individually create it, and it's our job to solve it. It's our job to address it. And it's our collective job. No one is exempt. And because there's a lot of it within us, and that takes us back to the conversation of how to be an anti-racist, because even as a Black woman, I deal with internalized racism and internalized depression. So I'm not exempt from this conversation either, though I know I maybe differ a little bit from how Kendi defines racism. And Dr. Johnson, I know that you have some things to say about that, so I hope we'll bring that into this conversation today. Jaquita, I wanted to pitch the first question to you. In How to Be an Anti-Racist, Kendi shares his own experience with racist thinking. How does his honesty help give us space to acknowledge and name our own racist behaviors and attitudes?
I've changed somewhat on this answer since I've heard the question the first time. Not drastically, but what I will say is this. I think specifically for Black people, the way he takes this journey is so important, because I know myself as a Black person did not believe that I was walking with internalized racism and walking with internalized white supremacy and expounding that out into the world. I did not believe that, just like as a chocolate Black woman, I did not believe that was something that was possible for me to do. But to listen to how he broke down his story, his journey, and to know it mimicked my journey so closely, we might have been living in the same house. I was saying, okay, I know I'm not the only Black person that went through this, and now who or on the other side of, working towards anti-racism are going, woo, some of the things I said in the 90s was problematic. And I'm so glad there was no Snapchat, no Instagram to, have all of that just out there in the public. So there was a bit of luck in that journey and being able to grow in a place without a lot of, snatching and grabbing. But I think the story, the way he did the story, is really important for Black people in particular, because we do not think that we have work to do on ourselves and that we are harming other Black and brown people. That colorism piece, was a big deal within the book, and his feelings on light-skinned Black women were a big deal to his growth and his maturity. And so I know I had that same journey. And I think it's important that Black people start reading and understanding that we got to do some work ourselves too.
I love that. I think that really eliminates it's all of our job. And I mean, I'll make it really personal, local, and immediate. As a teacher, I taught a practicum class, and the class the kids moved freely about. It was a printing class. And so they were printing, designing, and selling. And so I had 3 Black boys in my class, and that was rare to have that many Black kids in one class at Round Rock High School. There's only 4 to 5% Black children. And they were being really loud one day, which is absolutely fine. There was no reason for them to be quiet. Like, that's just the nature of the class. They were having a good time. They were getting their work done. But I actually shushed them. And I was like, y'all, I need you to be quiet. And they just looked at me. And one of them very respectfully said, Miss Harrison, okay, and we weren't doing anything different than, these white boys over here. We were just having a good time, and I don't understand why you're asking us to be quiet. And I had to pause and kind of like reckon with myself. Why was I asking them to be quiet? It was really unnecessary. I had targeted them as a Black woman. And, I shared this story in a training I did a couple weeks ago, and someone tried to soften the blow and say, you just knew that in other spaces they would get in trouble, so you were trying to protect them from getting in trouble. And I was like, no, because that means I'm upholding racist systems, and I'm telling them, you have to learn how to operate in this system that is unfair and disadvantages you, instead of me being an advocate for you to be able to show up in your full humanity. So that was a really sobering moment. I'm like super grateful for the confidence that those boys had to say, like, Ms. Harrison, kindly check yourself. Because that's something that I think about every day, and that's become a part of my practice as I continue forward on my very own anti-racist journey. So, Jaquita, I'd like to thank you for your vulnerability and for kicking us off. Dr. Johnson, Kendi writes, the only way to undo racism is to constantly identify it and describe it and then dismantle it. Why does he believe we need to call out racism when we see it, even if it can be uncomfortable to identify?
Well, this is right up my alley. Like you started with, everything in our worlds is racialized. There's nothing that's not touched by or connected to racialization processes. And so everything, I would argue, I do argue, everything either upholds white supremacy or works to dismantle it. So but it's hard. A lot of that stuff is hard to see. I mean, as you both have given wonderful examples of, it's hard to see. So anytime we can see it, because we're gonna not see it a lot of the time, but anytime we can see it, if we can then identify it and shine a light on it and start to undo it, that's the only way to undo it. It's because it's a system, right? It's all this integrated intermesh stuff. And so you got to like keep pushing at all the nodes and kind of breaking them apart. And then it can loosen and be something else. That's the only way forward. And comfortability, whose comfortability? Well, actually, that's complicated because I do think some people of color, some Black people are more comfortable not dealing with overtly talking about racism. And I get that. It's hard because it's hard. But you know what? It's hard, but racism kills people. White supremacy is deadly. White supremacy makes the life chances of my family members in rural Belize so very different. The only kid in our whole extended family, my husband has 11 siblings. The only one to have gone to college so far, my son, have completed college. I'm talking like 150 cousins. That's because of white supremacy. Okay, I'm done.
Thank you. We're just getting started. One thing that I want to point out, and this is something that Dr. Stephanie Hawley, the brilliant Dr. Stephanie Hawley, who is now the Chief Equity Officer, the very first one, and Austin ISD, told me that I carry with me and think about frequently. She said, you know, I was really struggling with some work I was doing in my district. And she said, white supremacy is intended to kill you. Like, you can't let it kill you. But she said, white supremacy is intended to kill everyone. And we need to stop thinking that everyone just means Black and brown folks, because it robs us of our humanity. And so ultimately it impacts all of us and we're all at risk. So if you don't care about my life, I hope that people care about their own lives. And maybe that's a motivation behind addressing this, this ill that
Can I pop a quick idea in there? I think you're absolutely right. I never thought about that before. It's intended to kill everyone except capital.
Right.
All it is about is creating capital. And then there's a few lucky ducks that get to hold that capital. Yeah, that's a really compelling idea.
I think everyone's day and time is still coming though. And so that's one thing that I find really interesting. I teach entrepreneurship and my students just did some research on famous entrepreneurs. And of course, every year somebody's got to grab Steve Jobs, and he died at like 52 years old, I want to say, or 57 years old. You know, he was very young, and that drive towards capitalism and white supremacy, that produces these ills that we see in our society that are robbing us of long and happy lives. And even, you know, I was listening to this podcast today, it's called Hey Girl. And I forget the lady's name. I'll have to look it up and see if it can be added to the list of resources. But there's a lady from the NAP ministry that was on it. And the NAP ministry is this great resource on Instagram and Twitter. And she's all about rest and rest as resistance. And, you know, she said like that driving force behind capitalism and white supremacy is what kills us. And so I just highly recommend that resource. This question's for everyone, and don't worry, Catherine, I have one coming up for you, but I think that it's important to kind of lay this foundation of this whole entire book. So anyone can answer this. The book's central message is that the opposite of racist is not racist. The true opposite of racist is anti-racist. The good news, Kendi writes, is that racist and anti-racist are not fixed identities. We can be racist one minute and an anti-racist the next. What does it mean to have to constantly reaffirm your identity as an anti-racist? Is there any benefit to the fact that you cannot just decide you're not racist or an anti-racist and be done with it? So that's like a deep question. Anyone?
I mean, you know, I'm always ready to jump in, but I was waiting to see if
Right.
Catherine was going to jump in first. My thing about this question is, you know, I feel like it's subjective. It's really hard as a darker skinned person to not have some foot in this game. Like it's really hard, nay, impossible. And if you are that type of woman and you also have children, you can just hang it up because it's showing up at your doorstep every day, all day, 24 hours a day. So it's really hard to say I can wake up one day and decide I'm not going to be anti-racist anymore. It's like saying I'm going to wake up one day and, you know, decide it's okay if people murder my kids. That's how I feel about it. It's like I don't have a choice. What kind of mom do I want to be? What kind of person do I want to be for my children? And if that means that I have to live this life, that's what I have to do. And I look at the women like Sojourner Truth who did this when she had nothing, when everything was designed against us. Like we lost RBG a couple of days ago, but I still think about Sojourner Truth had no female representation in any way. And she still got up there and showed so much strength, so much grit, so much tenacity, and never gave up. And I'm like, we don't get to be bogged down with well, it's not the perfect, if we don't get a majority this or these things happen, then we're just not going to be anti-racist anymore, or we need to take a break, or, you know, it's impossible. No, it's not impossible. This thing is something that we can do. And so it's the answer for me is like, I just can't not.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, I'd like to jump in and say, for me, it's two things. I'm the other side of Chiquita's situation. I'm light-skinned to the point that there have been times where I'm in a gathering and it's all white people except for me, but there are people there who don't realize I'm a person of color. So what I liked about Kendi's book is that it highlighted that issue as well, the colorism as well as all the different ways that we can be prejudiced against people because they're queer, because they're women versus men, because they're different cultures from different countries and so on. And I like that to me, it helps shine a spotlight on different ways I might be racist and the importance of choosing to be anti-racist. And I agree with him. The opposite of racism is not, oh, I'm not a racist. That's like saying, oh, I just don't have an opinion on it at all. It's like, no, the opposite of racism is to truly be an anti-racist. So I've been in that situation where I didn't say anything because, oh, it's going to make everybody uncomfortable. But the reality is it would have made me uncomfortable. And what really happened for me was having my son. So I have two sons who are clearly brown. And that's when I realized I have got to stand up. I have to be that advocate to protect their lives, which is crazy that you'd have to think that way. But I did. I had to stand up, and I still struggle with the speaking out, but I just think it's important for us to speak out and truly be that anti-racist. And if it makes people uncomfortable, even me, so be it. It's the only way we're going to change it.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. One resource that I want to insert here, because we've heard you all reference white supremacy several times, and there is a resource, it's white characteristics of white supremacy culture. So you can just Google it. And it speaks to the fact that we are all socialized in a similar culture. So even me as a Black woman, I've been socialized in white supremacy culture. And there are a couple of constructs that we assume in order to stay safe and comfortable. One of those is right to comfort. And so a lot of times we won't speak up because we want to protect not even our own right to comfort, sometimes our own right to comfort, but oftentimes it's the most powerful people in the room. So a white person's right to comfort. And so we'll experience discomfort, not in a growth kind of way, but in a harmful way, because we don't want to make anyone else uncomfortable for calling out their conscious or unconscious racism. And so I found that tool, if you're looking for tools to support your learning journey on how to be an anti-racist, that is a tool that I reference almost every day. There are a couple ways that white supremacy shows up that I had never even thought about. So right to comfort is one of them, perfectionism, is definitely one of them. And I think that when we're talking about choosing to be an anti-racist, I think that perfectionism comes in there, because I've experienced a lot of people early on their journey and their consciousness, and then something happens and they say the wrong thing and they offend someone, and then they're like, oh my gosh, I can't handle it, I gotta quit, because that's that perfectionism, when really we need to be committed to this work because we need to end racism. And so I would just highly recommend everyone kind of getting familiar with those characteristics, because it shows up in some really interesting ways that I'm sure we'll bring up again as we continue on our conversation today. So Catherine, the next question is for you. And you kind of touched on this like a little bit, but I would love for you to expound. What is the first step you personally will or have taken in striving to be an anti-racist? How will you check yourself and hold yourself accountable if you notice you or someone else is being racist?
Well, the biggest thing here for me is that I feel like reading through the different examples and the information in the book is that I've given myself permission really to start to look at my own behavior and other people's behavior to figure out where am I coming from, and just understanding that racism and prejudice can come in different forms for different reasons. And then the other thing that is helpful for me personally is that with my husband being a writer, he also was reading a lot of this material, and I feel like we can each hold each other accountable to say and support, here's what you're doing, and yes, this is anti-racist, or it's racist, and you need to look at your motives and your motivation.
I love it. That accountability piece is so beautiful, and really can only be had where there's like deep relationship and partnership. So that's a really beautiful thing. Meljohn, Kendi writes, white supremacist is code for anti-human, a nuclear ideology that possesses an existential threat to human existence. How are white supremacists and their ideology actually harmful to all of our humanity, including white people?
I love how you touched on this earlier, but I'll talk about the take that I talked about before, which is Sylvia Wynter's take on this. So I think this is absolutely true. So just to highlight, right, the idea that race exists, and he notes this in the book, that wasn't a thing until 1492, roughly. Certainly that you could put the world into 3 categories. So it's a recent idea, and it's an idea that was created where? Not in Africa, not in Papua New Guinea. It was created in Europe. And it was created in Europe. And so here's the Afro-Caribbean, the Jamaican theorist, Sylvia Wynter, has a critique of our understandings, like, and the we here is everybody who's in culture that has been influenced by European culture. So university cultures all over the world, and then all of Europe and the US and whatnot. And she argues that our idea of what it is to be human in these cultures is really based on a very limited idea of what humans are. And it's a European men in the 1800s who are middle class, the intellectuals. They were writing these theorists from whom our political systems, our economic systems, our idea of what culture is derives, were this little tiny fraction of the population of Europe, white, straight, Christian elite men, and that limited idea of the human then is taken for granted as if all humans are that. And that limited idea of the human, she has lots of interesting arguments, but she ends on this argument that its most like perfect form today is Homo economicus, the rational accumulator, the person that's out to get, the reason why you go to college is to get a job. The reason why we exist is to make money and accumulate things. And that category excludes all non-white peoples. So it's white supremacist in nature, and it's exclusionary. It only is based on this tiny portion of the population. And it's oriented towards the very thing that will kill us all. If we all accumulate, if that's what we're focused on, then we get this incredible destruction of the environment, destruction of each other, no caring, no relation with each other. We're all about this autonomous accumulating individual. So check out Sylvia Wynter, she's really amazing.
Absolutely. I'm going to add that to my long list of to ever growing.
Yeah, no, endless.
I think that we can really like look at what you're saying, even with COVID-19, like our push to reopen because of the economy at the expense of like humanity and people's lives, and our impatience to do what we can as a collective to guarantee people's safety and longevity, and then addressing our economic system. I think that that's like a very interesting tie into a very current moment. Jaquita, I like love watching you listen to other people because you just stay boosting other people when they're talking. Jaquita's in here like hyping everyone up, and I so appreciate that. This question is for you, particularly relevant in the times that we're living in. Kendi thinks that we should assess candidates as being racist or
Mm-hmm.
anti-racist
Mm-hmm.
based on what ideas they are expressing and what policies they are supporting, and not what they say is in their bones or their heart. Do you agree with
Yeah.
why or
Oh
not?
man.
And just to be clear, everyone watching, this is like not a political question. This is nonpartisan. This is just in general.
Period. And let me tell you, like I've been messing with the idea of doing like an equity um chart for these candidates, especially because I'm in these spaces, right? So I get to ask them questions that other people do not have the ability to ask. And I do it with a lens, an anti-racist lens and an anti-capitalist lens. And so when I'm asking the questions, I fully know what what to expect from them. And when they push through and give me an actual anti-racist answer, I'm championing that candidate. I don't care what they decide system that they're in, because it's still a system and we're still all beholden to the man. But like, I really believe that having candidates get away with not addressing anti-racism is the biggest problem we have in our political system. And I believe that because they will get up there and they will approve policies that are anti-racist, and they don't know, I mean, that are racist and they don't know that they're racist because they don't have a lens of what racism even is. They think if you're not wearing a Klan hood, you're not racist. So how can the policy be racist? How can the policy be a problem? And I'm going, how don't you know? Why don't you see this? This should be something that is a checklist that you go through. It's like, hey, do you have any sexual assaults? You know, they're getting away with that one, but I'm just saying, sexual assaults, what are your finances looking like? Do you pay your taxes? Have you been voting? Are you anti-racist? These should be basic things within our political spectrum. I think we could really move a lot further, especially locally, because locally is where things affect you the most. So locally, I get in with the sheriffs and the DA and the judges. I'm talking to all of them on both sides, because I know I'm gonna see you. I'm gonna show up and see you in some way, shape, or form, because I am the most affected by the system. If that's the case, you all need to be anti-racist. And if you are pushing back on me about having to be anti-racist, I know where you are. And I'm gonna tell everybody. So that's how I feel about it. I'm gonna let everybody know. I might not call you racist because I'm gonna be nice sometimes, but I will say you have decided not to be anti-racist, and people could take how they want to take it.
I love how you said I'm gonna be nice sometimes.
Sometimes.
You left room for the sometimes. I think this segues into another really important thing. And, you know, Jaquita, you talked about holding people accountable, especially people with power, because their individual racism and their individual hesitancy or lack of wanting to be an anti-racist has real impacts, life or death impacts on people in our community. And I'm working not to say but as much. And we also know that racism is systemic. So it operates in systems without the assistance of people, right? You could put non-racist, well-meaning people in the system. And this is how, when we talk about, you know, officers, well, they're a good person. Even though we're experiencing police brutality at high levels, it's not always about individuals. It's about a system that was built on racism and that holds racism. So we're not just talking about policies, we're also talking about practices, because we could have language that says that we want to uphold something. And I think about liberty and justice for all, you know, like that's a policy, but the practice is not that, right? And we know that to be true. So Mel-John, can you speak to like the systemic nature of racism and how sometimes that may cause people to say, well, it's the system, it's going to be the system, and not act? What do you see there, and what do you want us to see? What can you illuminate for us there?
Yeah, so this is a question that comes up in my teaching all the time, because I teach very clearly that racism is systemic. And what I mean by that is that, you know, it was invented in 500 years ago by Europeans, but it has infiltrated everything. So I'm a cultural anthropologist. I study how our deep subconscious works. And like you've all talked about, that there's internalized racism, people of color internalize racism. We're all raised in this white supremacist culture. And what that means, like we've noted before, is that shows up in all these interesting and odd ways, like wanting to make the powerful person in the room comfortable. So, I know I lost the question, but oh yeah, the individual and the system. So it's this systemic stew. I sort of think of, you know, white supremacy and anti-Black racism and anti-Indigenous and all of the other color categories that the Europeans put into place. It's a culture that we all take part in, and that doesn't mean then you can just. So there's a thing on the implicit bias training. So, you know, implicit bias training is good, but it's not enough, and that's absolutely true. So people need to be able to see, or the D'Angelo white fragility. The people need to be able to see their own racism wherever they're positioned. And your example with the police officers, Black police officers are also brutalized Black people. So like it's the culture that people are stewed in. So then how do you change culture is kind of what the question is. And of course it's changeable. It's only been around for 500 years. Humans have been around for 100,000 years. We've had advanced civilization, what do you want to call that, 10,000 years. Racism has been a tiny part of that. We can change it. We can act. And that's kind of why I like the book, because he does point at all of these spots where racism shows up, and every time you push against it, you break down that matrix a little bit more. But you can't give up. Yeah, you can't give up. You've got to try to see every little spot that you can and call it out. Educate others, and the more that people see, it's not just education, because it's not just white people. Power holds on to whoever is benefiting from the system is going to hold on to that power. So you've always got to be willing to push against that. I mean, I do this work at Southwestern. I've been trying to change things for 20 years. It's hard. And institutions are like, they're like molasses. And you just have to keep being she persisted. Is that Elizabeth Warren, right? You just got to keep pushing and pushing. And eventually there's little cracks. It's like a slow, but you got to stop. You can't not do it, or else you're supporting. If you don't do it, then you're upholding white supremacy. Okay, I talked way too long. I'm sorry.
Absolutely. No, I love it. I'm soaking it all up and taking it all in. And one thing I want to note too is that this is work that's done in community. So when we join hands and when we do it together, that's going to make the work. We're gonna as humans become more sustainable, I guess, in this work. Like we'll be able to continue. And that's more pressure to the system than when we individualize the work. And it's just like, even as we're talking, like we haven't even been talking for that long, but it's overwhelming a little bit of like all the things that we need to do. So we need to be anti-racist. We have to re-up our commitment by the day, by the hour, by the minute. Like sometimes we'll still do racist things, even though we seek to be anti-racist. So that's another thing. Okay, we need to do this in community in addition to our like personal commitment. It is a lot of work. Find some friends, people, and let's do it together, because that's what I know is going to help sustain us. And as a personal friend of Jaquita's, there's some days that I'm down and she's all the way up, ready to say, all right, you rest, but tomorrow we're back in the game. And so that community, if you're early in your anti-racist journey and you're joining us here today, that community is so important. And there are areas where you can plug in, you know, Courageous Conversations Georgetown, Undoing Racism Round Rock, search on Facebook for those communities to plug into as you continue your journey. So Kendi, Catherine, this question I really enjoyed your response to last time. And it says that Black people being perceived as superhuman require so much more force to be taken down. Address what is happening, particularly with the police. So underlying assumption that this person is superhuman. We're talking about the body chapter. In that body chapter, it's referred to as the Black body being seen as first and foremost as a beast. So can you speak to that a little bit?
Yes, yes. It was interesting to me that this is brought up. It's actually brought up mostly in the body chapter, but he also speaks about it in the gender chapter. And when I got to this section, it was this huge aha moment. You know, he talks a lot about the fact that we need to work on policies to have them be anti-racist. And it got me really thinking about all the stuff that's happening with police. Well, are there racist policies necessarily? And what I realized is the issue with the police and the way they're approaching people of color, it just goes back so far because in the book, Kendi talks about the fact that back in the 1400s, they wrote about Black people basically saying they were beasts. And that trend, sadly, pulls forward and continues. And he says that basically Americans today, and this is a quote from the book, they see the Black body as larger, more threatening, more potentially harmful, and more likely to require force to control than a similarly sized white body. And I read that and it just was like, whoa, that is exactly what we see happening. It's a person of color, and immediately you have these different police forces, these officers, and they might even be officers of color, and they feel like, oh my gosh, I've got to protect myself. I need 3 or 4 people to bring him down. I need to shoot more. I need to pull my weapon out. And we have to start to address this from a cultural standpoint with these various police departments to make them really look it in the face and say, this is racist. It's racist. You shouldn't need any more power, strength, or what have you for a Black man than a white man, or a white woman, or a Black woman. You just shouldn't. So we have to do something. We have to get education out there and shine a light on this.
Absolutely. We need to recondition, re-socialize. I
Yes.
think about this a lot as a teacher. And I think about my Black boys. So I teach at every level. So I teach freshmen all the way to seniors. And I think about, typically I teach juniors and seniors. So there have been a couple of classes where I did teach freshmen. This year is one of them. And I think about getting to see Black boys as freshmen and how they're little babies to me. And then I think about them having a year or 2 in high school and how they're looked upon as being grown men in our system, and how problematic that adultification of them is, particularly the adultification of Black girls too. You know, their bodies being more mature, them being grown women, them being fast. Like, that's something that we even do to Black girls in the Black community. So when we're talking about Black bodies, like, that is very heavy. I think about the healthcare system. You know, I'm of childbearing age, and as I'm thinking about this, I'm really thinking about the high rates of maternal mortality for Black women. And this isn't just a matter of like physical health. This happens across the spectrum of wealth. You know, if Serena Williams struggles, Tiffany Harrison might struggle. And that's something that I find myself being concerned about, because we know that Black women experience trauma and even death giving childbirth at the same rates as like developing nations giving childbirth here in the US. And so that bodies conversation, we tend to talk about it a lot with policing, but it is so far reaching. And that's the systemic nature of racism that we're seeing. For sure. So I can't wait for your answer on this, Jaquita, and you all have already, like Catherine, you already touched on this as well. So if anyone wants to chime in on this as well. Kendi makes the case that to be anti-racist, one must stand against all forms of bigotry. Why is standing against other bigotry so essential to standing against racism?
That's on period. Like, I guess I'm gonna keep saying this. I don't even understand why this is a hard concept to get. We are at the bottom of the barrel, period. Like, that's it. The bottom. So any intersectionality that we have, even if it's one, just being Black and a woman, already drops you so low. There's no, climbing out. So if you have a disability, if you are a veteran, even if you are anything that you can add, any ism that gets attached to that, LGBTQ plus, you're going to drop lower and lower and lower, and people will look at you as less human the lower that gets. Add Black to it, and you can just forget it. And I see this all the time when I'm in cities, or even in the suburbs, when you see the people who are homeless, when you see the people who are down and out and literally living in the streets, those are the categories. And you say to yourself, well, why is this person, why can't they get help? But it's because the system's been created across the board to make you seem useless or feel useless as a human being. There's no worth to you if you are any of these insert category. And so to me, it's like the moment I started doing equity training and understanding oppression in so many different ways, even if I didn't see myself in that category, I could see myself in that category. You know what I mean? It's hard to remove what I have to go through with what I'm seeing them go through. And so I just feel like it's some of the most important thing. Again, something that I feel like he was talking to the Black community about. The things that we will throw away as Black people based on white supremacy, and we don't know that's what we're holding up. That, like, including the elderly. Now, we're not as bad as some people when it comes to the elderly, because Big Mama is a whole thing. But at the same time, it's just needs to be more of an understanding of, when I'm in activist spaces and I hear how young activists talk about older activists as if they just didn't get it and they don't understand and they need to just sit down and don't talk. And I'm looking like, there were hoses in their situation, right? Dogs. We upset that somebody mad at us on Facebook. Are you kidding me? Hoses. And you ready to throw that whole person away because their perspective is not the same as yours? That's what I got from his book, is that, sometimes talking to people of color about the ableism, about the homophobia, transphobia, the things that are within our culture as problematic, we need to work on like it's racism. We need to work on like it's fighting racism, because it is. It's part of that system. And anybody in any of those categories will have a less advantage and will not see equality. You got nerve talking about equality, but not for them. Oh, don't get me started, Tiffany. It makes me so mad every time.
Yeah, and there's an element of white supremacy culture in what you just said, and that element is one that's almost imperceptible. It's that either or.
Yes.
One way or the other. You have to operate in the way I want you to operate, or we're going to throw you all away. And so that kind of mindset of like, we don't see eye to eye, bye. That's a function of white supremacy culture, and that impacts us because that keeps us separated from people that we love, from people that we have things to offer to, and from people we can learn from.
And you know what? Now because that right there, it's why the movement doesn't get further quicker. Because as soon as someone doesn't think it the same way you think it, we got to throw everything away. We can't work together. It's a lot of people that I know are racist, okay, that I work with because they're trying. I'm like, okay, you trying, so we're going to keep working. Now, when you quit, then I'm done with you. You don't want to work on your stuff. I ain't got time for people who don't want to work. But the throwing everything away because it doesn't look exactly like you think it should look kills the movement every time.
Yeah. Yeah. You're preaching to me, because that's something I definitely struggle with, is that canceling people. Woo, Lord, save me. for sure. So that was really helpful. I hope people caught hold of it. I did. I want to bring this Martin Luther King Jr. quote in here, and I love how people try to conveniently forget that he was actually a radical. Like, he wasn't here for your kumbaya. And people like to use that, but I just think this is really relevant. He said, in Why We Can't Wait, we are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. Yeah, so I think that that's a really important thing to remember as to why we should care about all forms of oppression and bigotry, and why we need to, as anti-racists, combat them all. I could talk to you all forever, but our time is coming to a close. So I wanted to leave each of you with this one question. Kendi believes we can defy the odds, heal society of racism, and create an anti-racist society. Do you believe that? Why is hope so central to the anti-racist movement? Dr. Johnson, will you start us off on this one?
Sure, and actually that's so interesting to think, have done these questions before, because I think I got a different answer. And I've been thinking a lot recently about the amazing resilience of Blackness in the Americas, in spite of all that was done, right? From 14, whenever the Portuguese first brought an enslaved person across the ocean. And just that alone gives me hope. The beauty of Black cultures, Black arts, the Belizean Creole culture that I am connected to, all of its beautiful relationality, and that those things persist despite the horror of white supremacy gives me hope, and gives me like, that's a super double extra plus reason to fight, not just for my own survival, but because there's so much glorious Black beauty and excellence everywhere that needs, that needs more space to grow. And again, racism hasn't been around for that long in the arc of human history. And so I think we can move past it. But I think that's where the hope is, in the amazing, and Indigenous peoples as well. Like, when I was young, the idea I learned in elementary school, that no more Native Americans, right? They all died off. No, Indigenous culture is going strong. So if that can happen, then we can create a new and a different world. I don't know what it's going to look like. It's going to require our imaginations to generate it, but that's where I kind of am on that.
Thank you for that. Catherine?
Well, at the end of Kendi's book, he talks about the fact that whether you feel like it'll happen right now or not, I mean, like, I'm looking at my lifetime and thinking, will it happen in my lifetime? And I go back to, like, my husband's lifetime. I mean, he started in a segregated world, having to go to, wanting to walk into the front of a diner and having to go around back if he wanted to be served. So we've certainly come a long way from that. And I don't know in my lifetime if things will move forward any more than that, but we have to continue to fight, and we just have to ignore whatever odds you think there are, and we have to fight to create that anti-racist world. We can't give up on it, and just have that faith in humans, that they can move forward and make changes and have that brightness of the future. When I look at my little 2-year-old grandkids, I want to see that brightness of the future for them, that we won't have to have some of these conversations with them that we had to have with our children, that my husband's parents had to have with their children. So we just have to have that hope. So that's what drives me, is that hope for the future.
Thank you. Yeah, I like the phrase that planting seeds for a tree whose shade we may never sit under. Jaquita?
Well, I'm raising whole warriors over here. Like, I'm not playing with these people. They done got on my last nerve, and I'm making sure every child that benefits in this home is going to be a whole problem. And that middle one especially. I just need to put the warning out. People just figure it out before she turns 18, 19, 21. Because she don't care. She don't care. And I messed up giving her my name. And so whole attitude and is already aware of things in a way I was not aware of. And she's 12. She just turned 12. So I'm just like, that one right there, if y'all don't have it figured out, by the time she hits 18, 19, it's not going to be 30 like me, 35, 40. No, you got till she can get a license, and that's it. And she going to come out swinging. And I'm not trying to save nobody either. Don't call me. I'm going to let her loose on everybody. And she got backup. She got 4 brothers and sisters that's going to be right with her. And that's what gives me hope. I look at them and I go, oh boy, I'm trying to save y'all right now. I'm trying to be like them. They don't care. So I get so excited every time I see them even having conversations with each other about the patriarchy and capitalism. And it's my 12-year-old and my 6-year-old and my 18-year-old and 21-year-old, 10-year-old. Like, they're having these conversations and they're not all the way adults. Boy, bye. Y'all in trouble. Them kids is going to get you. And I got so much hope.
Yeah, I agree. As a teacher, getting to see students, I often tell people I'm a high school teacher and their response is, oh, bless your heart. I don't know how you can do it. And I just think, first of all, what kind of like an ugly thing to say? And second of all, these kids have it. They have it. They're empathetic. They understand nuance. They're bold. They care about, doing things that builds longer tables instead of higher fences. So yeah, I'm hopeful for the future because of that. I wanted to say thank you so much for joining us. This has been such a lovely afternoon, and I have so loved getting to discuss How to Be an Anti-Racist by Dr. Ibram X. Kendi with you all. Thank you for joining us and for making this such a wonderful conversation. If you're joining with us and you're watching this, I hope that you will commit to continued work in this area and know that even as we're talking today, we're still each on our journeys. So please be encouraged, plug in, find a community, and let's get to work because it's a moral imperative that we learn to be anti-racist. Thank you for joining us.